but it does not easily map onto Western understandings of either philosophy or religion. And although that little suffix ism in the word Daoism implies a relatively unified and well integrated system, Daoism is anything but that. Daoism cannot be reduced to a few essential texts, concepts, or practices. In fact, it's been compared to a vine. Daoism is always changing and growing and branching off of itself. Also, like a vine, it's entangled in other aspects of Chinese culture: Confucianism, Buddhism, Chinese folk religion, and more. Daoism has incorporated ancestor veneration, Chinese shamanism, divination, breath meditation, Chinese traditional medicine, and alchemy. So the question, what is Daoism, is not easy to answer. But in this video, we'll try to untangle all of these complexities, going through a general overview of Daoism, its two foundational texts, and a few of its religious lineages, beliefs, and practices. Considering the name Daoism, it makes sense to start with the concept, the Tao. This comes from the Chinese word which is most often translated as the way, but it can also mean path, method, style, or technique. You might have seen it spelled with a T instead of a D. This spelling uses a system for rendering Chinese words in English called the Wade-Giles system. It's the same reason why you might sometimes see Peking instead of Beijing, the latter of which uses the so-called pinyin system. Academics generally use the pinyin system these days, and this is the system I'll be using in this video and all future videos on Daoism. So what is the Tao? Well, it's almost impossible to define, and ironically, the opening line of the central Taoist text, the Tao Te Ching, says the Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal Tao, but we're going to try to speak of it anyway. A few ways scholars define the Tao is ultimate reality and its manifestations in everyday life, the underlying cosmic power which creates the universe, and the energizing process through which everything in the cosmos unfolds and is transformed. It's not accurate to think of the Tao like a god. It's not an active personal entity, but rather it's an organic order, an organic process that just moves along naturally and spontaneously. Taoist thought and practice aims to find the best way to live in the world by aligning with this organic cosmic flow of the Tao, transforming our thoughts and actions to be in harmony with its natural order. Now, this might sound very abstract, but as we'll see throughout this video, aligning yourself with the Tao is meant to be a very concrete and pragmatic way of living. Over the past 2,500 years, Taoists have provided all manner of ritualized practices that can help to align yourself with the Tao, that involve medicine, alchemy, divination, venerating the gods, as well as bodily and mental techniques. So where did this all start? While Taoism does not have a single founder or birthplace, there are two foundational texts where we can start: the Tao Te Ching and the Zhuangzi. The former is attributed to Lao Tzu and is sometimes called the Lao Tzu, while the latter is attributed to the philosopher Zhuangzi, also known as Zhuangzhou. There's evidence that Zhuangzi was a historical figure, while Lao Tzu, which means old master, may or may not have existed. Some scholars think he may be a stand-in character or a personification of ancient wisdom or tradition. Let's start with Lao Tzu. Although most scholars view him as legendary, ancient Chinese histories say he lived during the 6th century BCE, but accounts of his life are full of inconsistencies and legends. The grand historian of the Han Dynasty tells a story of Confucius consulting Lao Tzu for advice on the meaning of li, or propriety, a very important concept in Confucianism. Lao Tzu reproaches him for being self-righteous, and Confucius leaves profoundly impressed, which is a common theme in these legends. Lao Tzu is frequently depicted correcting Confucius, and Confucius is depicted as deferential to the old master's authority. Since the Han Dynasty, Lao Tzu became venerated as a deity and seen as a personification of the Tao, and High Lord Lao is still worshipped widely today. Although the Tao Te Ching is traditionally attributed to Lao Tzu, most scholars now believe that it was composed by multiple authors during the Warring States period, an era of warfare and military consolidation from 475 to 221 BCE. Shorter, earlier versions of the text must have been circulating in the late 4th century, while the text as we have it today was not compiled until around the 3rd century. The Tao Te Ching is a collection of short sayings. It consists of 81 verses and around 5,000 words. However, although it's a relatively short text, it's a famously difficult text to understand and covers a huge range of topics. As the scholar of Daoism Livia Cohn says, you can read the text as a religious, political, military, or naturalistic treatise dealing with psychology, the natural world, or society. And it often juxtaposes ideas in contradictory ways. This is illustrated in one of the most famous lines of Chinese philosophy, which comes from the first line that we referenced before. The Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal Tao. The name that can be named is not the eternal name. Most scholars interpret this line as expressing skepticism toward our ability to convey the meaning of Tao with human language. The Tao Te Ching is the first text that articulated a Taoist vision of the Tao as an absolute principle or source of existence. One of the main themes is that the Tao is a wellspring of creative power for a universe that is constantly experiencing transformation. This process of ceaseless transformation is represented in the famous yin and yang symbol. Yin and yang originally referred to the shady and sunny sides of a hill. Throughout the day, one side is bathed in sun and the other in shadow. One side is not necessarily superior to the other, but rather they exist together in harmony. In order to live in harmony with the Tao, humans must embrace this constant transformation of the universe and realize that opposites in the world are complementary. The Tao Te Ching explains how to achieve this harmony with another important concept called wu-wei, which is often anglicized as wu-wei and is translated as non-action or effortless action. This means refraining from action when it would interfere with the natural expression of different things and their potential outcomes in accordance with the Tao. Action should be natural, spontaneous, and free of ingrained habits. The Tao Te Ching says, act but as wu-wei. Be active, but don't let your conduct be intentional and deliberative. In other words, wu-wei promotes an attitude of stillness and non-intervention, but it does not advocate for being completely passive. Rather, it's a spontaneous way of acting that lets go of your own self-interested concerns and guards against behavior that is too assertive, that could lead to bad outcomes like hatred, greed, violence, or aggression. Water is a common metaphor for the Tao, and the Tao Te Ching highlights it in Chapter 8 as the highest good. The greatest good is like water. It benefits all life without being noticed. It flows even to the lowliest places where no one chooses to be, and so it is very close to the Tao. It adapts to all necessities. It moves at the right moment. It never flaunts its goodness, and so it never attracts any blame. This leads us to the other major theme in the Tao Te Ching, the sage. Through non-action and aligning with the Tao, someone can become a fully realized person, attaining the perfect way of being in the world. And this is not an ideal just for individuals, but an ideal for all of society. A ruler who's a sage can help a community align with the Tao, and thus harmony and order can arise in an entire society. The second foundational Taoist philosopher is Zhuangzi. He lived during the Warring States period and is said to have abandoned a career as a minor government official and instead lived a life as an impoverished hermit. The Zhuangzi is a collection of colorful stories and often very funny anecdotes that embrace a bunch of different voices, including those of animals, trees, and thieves. He didn't write the entire book, though, and is credited with only 7 of its 33 chapters. The remaining chapters come from different groups of authors that may represent different schools of thought. Partially because it's a composite text, the Zhuangzi does not put forward a single Tao that everyone must follow, but it does focus on several major themes. One theme is inner freedom in the midst of ordinary life, and a return to a life of simplicity. This is demonstrated in the story Free and Easy Wandering, which is also one of the main inspirations for the Chinese animated epic film Big Fish and Begonia. This anecdote tells the story of a fish who transforms into a mythical bird, who then tries to migrate far away to the south. But the other animals mock the bird for embarking on a seemingly impossible journey. Yet the story describes the naysayers as small and short-lived, praising the migratory bird for being able to feel at home within an expansive realm, and for setting its sights on an incredibly far-off destination. This story illustrates the importance of traveling beyond convention. It involves outward movement beyond familiar spaces and transforming one's focus to be more aligned with the cosmos. Another major theme in the Zhuangzi is the Taoist principle, the equality of things, a sense of equilibrium and willingness to let go of attachments to temporary states of being. The most famous story illustrating this is Zhuangzi's Butterfly Dream, a story about the radical instability of our supposedly unique identities and perspectives. As the story goes, Zhuangzhou dreamt he was a butterfly, fluttering around, happy with himself, and doing as he pleased. But suddenly he woke up, and he didn't know if he was a human who had dreamt he was a butterfly, or a butterfly dreaming he was a human. This story teaches us to reject absolutes and consider all things as relative to one another. Dreaming and waking, life and death, these are merely transformations from one state to another. One is not necessarily more real or more significant than the other, and so one should not be so attached to life or bothered by death, and strive to embrace transformations as they occur. Which leads us to another major theme in the Zhuangzi, the Zhenren, which we can translate as the perfected person or the realized person, a person who is aligned with the Tao and who lives spontaneously, embraces transformation, and is at peace with the world. When you hear the perfected person, you might think of wise philosophers or maybe even superheroes, and the Zhuangzi and later Taoist literature in general elevates certain people as immortals or transcendents, people who have achieved a state that transcends earthly existence and its limitations. The Zhuangzi says that such people are godlike. Though great rivers freeze, they cannot chill him. Though swift lightning splits the hills and howling gales shake the sea, they cannot frighten him. A man like this rides the clouds and mist, straddles the sun and moon. Even life and death have no effect on him. Later Taoists speak of immortals being able to fly, shapeshift, control the weather, and of course, live forever. But the Zhuangzi frequently holds up ordinary people as ideal examples of the perfected person. There's a butcher whose knife never goes dull because he cuts meat in accordance with the Tao, following the natural lines of the animal and practicing his art, ignoring his senses and following his spirit. There's a swimmer who does not get tired in the water because, as he says, I started with what I knew, matured my innate nature, and allowed destiny to do the rest. I go in with the currents and come out with the flow, just going with the Tao of the water and never being concerned. And there's a woodworker who becomes so calm and empty while working, he says, I am so still, I forget I have 4 limbs and a form and body. My skill is concentrated and all outside distractions fade away. Each one of these ordinary people exemplifies the perfected person, people who have aligned themselves with the Tao and have achieved the ideal way to exist in this world. So that's a brief overview of the philosophical underpinnings of Taoism. But what about the aspects that might be more stereotypically classified as religious?